In this webinar, we will discuss the importance of US clinical experience or USCE. Now, this USCE can come as form of electives, which is highly preferable. These are the rotations you do when you're still a student in medical school, or it can also be done after you graduate. Many students do it as part of observerships or as part of hands-on experiences after they graduate. As many of you who may be planning to apply and do these rotations are aware that USC has become very critical for your applications. In fact, many programs will not even consider your application if you don't have 2 to 3 months of solid hands-on US clinical experience. Now, why is this USCE or rotations or electives important? As our panel points out in this webinar, there are several reasons. One reason, of course, is the knowledge of the US healthcare system that these rotations give you. It could be the electronic medical record, getting used to these EMRs, and it's also partly because you get to interact with the patients in the US healthcare system. You understand the cultural nuances, you know how to work with the healthcare team in the system. So, all that is very important. Of course, letters of recommendations are a key outcome of this USCE or a rotation that you will do. In terms of our panel, we had a very diverse panel. We had attending physicians, we had PGY2 residents, we had applicants who had applied for match, and we had medical students. One of them, the attending physician, was Dr. Saad. Dr. Saad is affiliated with William Beaumont, Wayne State University, University of Michigan, and his team does about 150 rotations at 8 of his locations. So he had very interesting perspective on what program directors look for as they evaluate your application. Many of our USMLE Sarthi students rotate with him every year. So watch on and let us know if you have any questions. You can reach out to us on YouTube, Facebook, or through our website.
Good morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, depending on the time zone, East Coast, West Coast, Asia, wherever you are. I'm glad you're here. So today we have a very exciting agenda. We want to talk about IMGs, U.S. clinical experience, what residency programs look for in those USCEs as they evaluate the LORs, as they interview you. And we have a great panel. We have Dr. Saad, who has about 150 students each year rotate at each of his 8 locations. So he has great experience. And then we have our own students, Jaideep Mishra. He is a PGY2. He also rotated with Dr. Saad. He's in internal medicine now. We do expect a couple of other current students. I think Patrick is there. And we have some other match students who are in their residency who want to talk about the importance of USCE for IMGs. Dr. George Koshi Villanilum. Many of you may have read his blog about USMLE Step 1 going pass-fail. So we have the packed agenda. What we are going to do is all the attendees are in the listen-only mode. So we'll go around the table, around the virtual table. We'll have some questions, discussions. We will take your questions at the end. You can all type your questions, and there should be a chat window, and then we'll go from there. So here are the following topics we want to cover as part of this. Why are the U.S. clinical experience, the rotations, electives or externships, why are they important for the IMGs, whether you are a Caribbean IMG or a non-Caribbean IMG? And then what do programs look for, as I said, as they're evaluating your applications? What do they look for in those LORs, in those experiences? What do they talk about, or they want to listen during the interview when you talk about your USCE? We will also talk about how this will change, or the impact of pass-fail on the rotation's importance after 2022, if you guys are planning to apply after 2022. And finally, we'll have some of the students talk about rotations experience with Dr. Saad. He's our star faculty when it comes to rotations. Students have great experience with him, so we want to understand how he leads the students during the rotations, what all roles, responsibilities students have, and how can students earn a great LOR. What can they do to get a great LOR as part of the U.S. clinical experience. So all that Dr. Saad is going to cover. Before we get started, for those of you who don't know about us, we help you in all aspects of your USMLE journey, the application, personal statement, interview prep, obviously rotations. So you can always get in touch with us. But today we are going to talk about only these rotations, their importance, the U.S. clinical experience. All right. With that said, you can always look us up on the website. You can look us up, on the contact us for these rotations. But I do want to get started now, and let me just widen the screen and start with the questions for our panel. So the first thing, I guess, is the importance of U.S. clinical experience. So let me start with you, Dr. Saad, and get your thoughts on why the U.S. clinical experience, the hands-on experience, is important for IMGs. What have you seen over the years? You've done, more than 400 students at 8 locations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me today, Pawan. I really appreciate you holding this webinar, allowing us to talk about these rotations and what we could offer, and thank you for the opportunity. So the reason these rotations are so important is it's almost like an audition in the American medical system for that month, where some students who come and rotate here have never rotated in the United States, and they're able to rotate in the clinic along the hospital for those 4 to 8 weeks to get good exposure, which will help them on future USMLE steps if they're taking the CS. They'll get good patient interaction, and then that'll allow them, when they apply for residency, to discuss the clinical rotations they've done here in the United States, so the program directors will feel more comfortable with that student, being that they've done some rotations here and they have some hospital exposure along with clinic exposure. So the rotation provides this, whether they're doing one rotation for 4 weeks or a longer amount of weeks, it'll provide a audition into the United States medical system, into their clinics, and that will build confidence and allow program directors to be more comfortable with the students, especially with the changes, in how program directors are going to be evaluating students. These rotations are extremely important when it comes to that.
So, Jaideep, what is your perspective? You've gone through the system. You're now PG2. What do you think? How are these rotations helpful for a potential applicant?
Thank you, Pawan, for asking a very important question, which I think is important in the life of all the IMGs. And as Dr. Saad rightly mentioned, these rotations enable the student to actually learn and master the ACGME 6 core competencies, which is highly valued and seen in the letter of recommendation. And the rotations give a great experience in terms of patient care. It enables the IMGs coming and training in different countries to learn the American way of communication, patient-centric care, and allows them to actually get accustomed and accultured to the American way of patient care. So I think rotations are really the most important part, besides the scores and the other factors that are important to get the dream destination of a residency.
Yeah. George, I think you are on phone. Any thoughts from an applicant perspective?
I think most of the points have been covered. The only other addition would be, should the system change in 2022, the role of USCE will become much more important, because earlier the way that an IMG would make his or her application stand out would be through high scores before attempting to go into USCE. Now, who you know, where you know them, and what letters of recommendation they write for you into USCE is going to be much, much more important.
Good. Okay. Now, before I get into the letter of recommendations, I do want to bring out the cultural learnings that IMGs need to have as they do these rotations, get ready for CS or their application. So Dr. Saad, what have you seen in terms of the cultural learnings? Where are these gaps that rotations help the students pick up in, coming from, say, Asia or even Europe and may not be aware of the U.S. Medical culture or social culture? What are some of the things you have observed from a cultural standpoint that these rotations help the students with?
Oh, yeah, they've been huge, allowing these students to see the different way patients' comfort levels are with doctors. So some students have never been in the United States, and just the way we patients and doctor interactions are here are different than the way they are in the Middle East or in Asia or in the other parts of the world. So the students will be able to get one-on-one exposure with patients, and that'll sort of break down some of the barriers. And the repetition and the multiple patients they see per day allow them to get more comfortable in the States, talking to patients, because the English language might not be their first language. So allow them to start to learn a little bit more, the medical terminology, how to carry a discussion with the patients, how to explain, certain test results. And that really builds confidence for the students who are going to be applying to residency or taking their CS. So the clinic provides that exposure that's much needed.
Okay. Jaideep, are there any examples you had from a cultural learning perspective as part of your hands-on? Like things
I had a lot of
idea?
Yes, I had a lot of great cultural experiences working with Dr. Saad, doing rotation in inpatient and outpatient with him. And something simple is, as Dr. Saad said, it's about communicating to the patient and ensuring patient privacy as the primordial importance, and making the patient a partner in all the decisions. So that would, and Dr. Saad's clinic had diverse pathologies. It also had cases of opioid addiction, where I actually learned to counsel the patient on quitting and choosing healthier lifestyles. So there was counseling involved. And besides that, since where I rotated in Dearborn, it has a very heterogeneous crowd of population. There were also cultural sensitivities in terms of, talking to the patient, in terms of seeing different ethnic groups, and at the same time explaining to the patient what was going on. So all this training in India, where it is a doctor-centric care, the emphasis is on the doctor doing most of the things. And in the United States, it's a patient-centric care. So what really is important for a foreign graduate to master is the care of the patient and explaining to the patients everything in a layperson's way that the patient can understand. And for me, that was a big learning that I learned by rotating in Dearborn with Dr. Saad.
Thanks. Patrick, are you on? I see you there.
Yes,
Are you on phone? So any cultural kind of learnings you had as part of your hands-on? I mean, I know you're still rotating at another location. So what have you learned as an IMG as part of these rotations?
Thank you so much, Pawan, for the question. So I rotated with Dr. Saad 1 month before my CS exam, and there's a huge thing like that you have to do some kind of rotations in the United States before you take your CS exam. And I think rotating with Dr. Saad was one of the best decisions I made before doing my CS exam. So after my graduation in India, I worked as a doctor for 2 years, and like working, so I actually thought that I had a lot of experience working and like, talking to patients, and with my English, I would never have a problem with anything of that sort. But the thing is, the system is so different when you compare India or any other country with America. So because in other countries, for example, when I was working in India, you're seeing like a huge mass of patients, like you're seeing 100 or 120 patients per day. So you hardly have like 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes with a single patient. And so you just ask the chief complaints, there's no empathy involved, there's no care for the patient, you do not understand the emotions of the patient. You just treat and then just move on. So that's not the system in America. In America, you actually spend time with the patient, you understand the patient, you try to understand what the patient is going through. And that's really important for the American healthcare as well as for your CS exam. So even though you do not have a problem with your English, still trying to show that empathy and care for the patient was very important, and I got to know a lot about that when I was rotating with Dr. Saad, and I think that's very important.
Good. All right, let's switch gears and now talk about the evaluation of your applications. What programs look for in those LORs, in say your rotations LOR. So I want to go to George. So George, you are now also PG2. What have you seen, observed, and then I'll go to Dr. Saad and Jaydeep in terms of what programs look for in these rotations kind of LORs?
Yeah, this is a very important question. A lot of people, they go into USCE without knowing what to expect or what their essential goal is through a USCE. So you need to have a set of personal and professional goals that you have to achieve through a USCE, and that has to be translated into your LOR, which program you want to look at. So I think personally, like I've discussed this with a couple of program selection committee members also before. One of the most important things is how personalized your LOR is. So by personalized, I mean, what are the personal experiences that the letter writer has noted in his or her letter regarding the applicant? So telling them a very personal experience about how this person did something is very important, because program directors or the committee members, they see hundreds of letters a day, and what aspect of this letter is is different, or what aspect of this letter will make them look past those scores, look past those attempts, or look past any red flag in your application. What aspect of that is gonna make them look beyond that. That's what's important. So personal experience, I feel, is the number one thing. And the second thing would be all the main competencies of the ACGME, as Dr. Mishra said. Professionalism is very important. Seeing if explaining to the program director, the committee, that this person is or has been professional or has acted professionally in my clinic. It seems like a very simple thing, seems like common sense, but at the same time, this has to be written. This has to be emphasized. This person is appropriate for our medical care. This person is going to do the best for our patients. That's very important. And the third thing would be, it's not just medical knowledge. Medical knowledge will be emphasized on the letter. But apart from that, I feel like there are certain wordings that letter writers use that makes program directors more comfortable with. For example, if you are rotating with a clerkship director, or you're rotating with an associate program director, or somebody in an academic setting, if they write in their letter something like, if I were the program director, I would have no hesitancy in taking this applicant into my own program. That, I feel, is the strongest statement that somebody can write, and writing such statements or writing similar statements with regards to like being very personal in the letter would are like really strong things in a letter of recommendation. These are like the the things that really stand out, but apart from that, everything else would just make the letter very generic.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Saad, you obviously gave a lot of LORs because you have so many students. So what is your perspective? You know, what do you interact with program directors at Beaumont and Wayne State and, other universities. So what have you seen?
We actually had a local program director who visited our site about 3 weeks ago, and we talked specifically about letters of recommendations. And we went over the students' rotations because the students that rotate in the clinic that go to the hospital, it's at the hospital that he's the program director at. And what he said about letters of recs was avoiding generic language and try to give personal experiences, as George had just said, that the student has during the rotation year. So if I have a student who works with me for the 4 weeks and I feel comfortable and confident writing a strong letter of recommendation, I'll actually have a talk with that student and try to, because the students in our clinics get about 200 individual patient exposures for that 4-week rotation.
Wow.
So so we give about, on average, 200 patient interactions and complete different pathology. So each student will have an exam room, 10 different patients per day over that 4-week rotation. And for me, when I'm going to write the letter of recommendation, if it's a student that I really want to, push and write a good letter, I will get start a discussion with the student at the end of the rotation to see if he had any patient exposure that really stood out to him. We can discuss it, and I'll incorporate it in my letter, try to personalize a little bit more. So avoiding the generic language, and including some of the hands-on experience and the personal experiences during that rotation are extremely important in the letter of recommendation. And that's what the program director had, we had discussed that visit here as well about the LORs.
Okay. Thank you. Now let's switch gears and talk about actual interviewing day and how programs would want you to explain, articulate those experiences. So Jaydeep, let me start with you. You've again gone through this, you've interviewed based on your USCE. So what are the things programs expect you to talk about as you are there on the interview day about your US clinical experience?
I think whenever a program is interviewing a candidate, they're trying to look if that particular candidate is a suitable match for their program. And they're trying to look at the competencies and the virtues and the qualities that he or she has developed over the course of these United States clinical experiences. Something important, which for me was using the EPIC, which is one of the EMRs that my hospital uses too. And at Dr. Saad's clinic, I was trained to use EPIC very comfortably. And I could speak about being, very comfortable with the electronic medical record, something again which is not available in the countries, in the other countries besides United States. So using the EMR comfortably and having used EPIC for 2 months when I did rotations at Dearborn, I was very comfortable. So the program, when they are recruiting, they are also looking at the, whether the person whom they're recruiting as a future resident would be able to carry out all the functions required for the residency. And it also involves, all the ACGME 6 core competencies, like I mentioned professionalism, and Dr. George talked about the other competencies too. For me personally, when I was rotating with Dr. Saad, it was, as I explained, I had a case where I had to counsel a patient. I had a patient who was challenging, who did not understand how alcohol was impacting his health and was non-compliant with the medications that we were given for his addiction. So it also involved a lot of intricacies which the programs are interested to see whether the candidate has or not, and in a professional setup. Like I remember breaking a bad news. And I did that in the clinic when I was seeing a patient. So it made me very comfortable in these situations because I was independently seeing those cases under Dr. Saad's supervision, but I had complete autonomy, which was guided. And at the same time, I was documenting the notes. So that made me very, very fluent and conversant with the EMRs of United States. And when I was talking about, sharing about these experiences on my interviews, it was seen as a very strong point.
Okay. I think, okay, Dr. Saad is back. So Dr. Saad, in terms of, what programs want to hear on the interview day about rotations experience in general, and again, you speak with program directors every day. What do they tell you? What do they want to know on the interview day? When the time is limited and the applicant really has to stand apart, stand aside. So what do they want to know during the interview?
Yeah, scores are extremely important, although soon they're going to be watered down a little bit. But what they really want is they want a resident whose personality is going to mesh into the hospital system, into with the other residents, with the program. That way for the next 3 years, they really have a partner working with them, somebody that's going to get along with the staff and the other residents, who's going to be a hard worker. And in our clinic, we're able to evaluate that because there's multiple students who rotate together. And it's almost like a little bit of a residency program here. So that's extremely important when applying to a residency. They want to make sure that person got along with the medical assistants, with the doctor attending, with the other students. Along with meshing into the program easily would be somebody, as JD had said, who's efficient in EMR ready. Because if it's your first time using EMR going into a residency program, that's going to take a couple months for them to adjust into that. So they definitely want to look at their exposure in the EMR system. They want to look at, has the student rotated in a hospital setting? Has the student rotated in a clinical setting here in the United States? That'll allow the program director to feel comfortable because he knows this patient is aware of what HIPAA is. This patient is aware of, the nurse's rights to the patients. This student is aware, how rounds are typically ran. And these are extremely important to program directors, and that's what the rotation here and other sites provides. So I think that's extremely important what program directors do look for.
Okay, very good, very good. Jaideep, any thoughts on the program directors? Anything else that we missed? I don't know if George is there. He may have to step out.
So it's just seeing not only they're trying to recruit somebody, they're trying to see if the person fits into the residency for the 3 years, whether it'll be easy for them to work with the person. And so they're looking for person experiences from the LOR. And something very important is they're looking, letterhead of the LOR also matters. So I remember because the rotation that I did at Michigan with Dr. Saad was on the letterhead of Beaumont. So that also plays an important role because it is showing that you've been in a hospital setting and you would be able to take the roles of your future residency very easily. So it's an overall assessment of seeing whether you'll be the right fit for them, and that should be supported and backed up by personal experiences that should be in the LOR, which could be about professionalism, which could be the multidisciplinary approach that is run in most of the hospitals, working with the nursing team, working with the techs, and working with the complicated healthcare system that applies in the United States. And if you can do that, the program has confidence that they do not have to spend extra time in allowing that resident to get used to the new system, and the new resident would be the right fit for the program.
So Dr. Saad, before we get Amit on, your thoughts on the step 1 pass-fail change starting 2022. How do you think that's going to impact the IMGs? Should rotations now become more important? What are you thinking as we get into the pass-fail?
Absolutely. So there's going to be a big shift. It's going to make things a little more difficult for the foreign medical graduates who are just banking on their extremely high scores. So now the program directors need a well-rounded individual, somebody who has passed the exams but really has other things that they could put forth, such as hands-on experience, clinical rotations in the States, being in the hospital setting. All of that's going to really, really, really be important because the program directors can't just look at your scores. Now they need a candidate in front of them who's going to be able to go over multiple things they have done, including the rotations that they have done here in the state. So this change in the score, even the program director I had a discussion with a couple weeks ago, he's not clear exactly where this is going to take interview process because it's going to be new. And he says usually the first thing we say is, okay, show me the scores, see if there's any research, and then they go to the interviews. Now there's not show me the scores. It's going to be, does the student have good good rotations with LORs, and does this patient have any research? And so those at the interview, that rotation with the LOR to match that rotation is, one of their first go-to things that they're going to have when they're doing the interview with these students.
So let me ask you one more question. What is the most common kind of learning that you've seen students get, right? I mean, some students may be stronger in one aspect, weaker in the other, but what are the common threads you've seen? Common threads in terms of what they need to improve upon, in terms of what they end up learning?
Depending, because a lot of foreign graduates that come to US, they come directly after they graduate or when they're in their final year. And in Middle Eastern countries and Asia, there's no real concept of sub-internship. The clinical rotations are kind of found over 2.5 to 2 years of period along with your academics. And it's a very passive learning. So a lot of students, when they come here, they kind of are still in that headspace where they expect that, it is going to be just like that. They take more of a passive role. So we try to give them an active role, and it's not something that happens in a day or a week. It's a process. But you provide them with a safe space where they don't feel overburdened or, just thrown into a pit. But they are allowed to take an active role. And like I said before, you have to show initiative because the health system here is so intense and aggressive that if you don't, take stand for yourself, nobody else is going to do it for you. So everybody is helpful, but a part of it you have to initiate it. So that is what we encourage, to take more of an active role than a passive role. And again, with new changes in the USMLE Step 1 with the passive, not only that just kind of puts a lot of things into gray space, especially with when it comes to matching into residency programs compared to IMGs, because they already have a preference. But at the same time, when Step 1 pass-fail is implemented, a lot of focus will be on your clinical rotation. And some rotations, they already have established themselves amongst program directors because they provide this good output of externs. But at the same time, because I personally believe in a very strong academic background, so when Step 1 changes to pass-fail system, that is going to eventually put people into a position where they will just take the exam to pass it. So now this is a question. This is a dogma that should you just take Step 1 to pass it, or should you actually study, no matter if you pass, fail, or get a good score, to actually have the strong clinical foundation? Because when I see a student, and I don't personally really believe in favoritism or caring about which school you come from or who recommended you or what, but I want to know what you know. So if you cannot just, establish yourself and show me that you have a strong grounding, everything else is kind of secondary. So active role, active learning, a good basic sciences background, ability to take initiative, ability to work as a team, also just be someone who is compatible to work with. So these are just a handful of things that you have to either have or learn to have in the long run.
Thank you very much, Amir. We appreciate your time. Yeah. So let me just, as we wrap up, and here are the rotations that you can see on the screen. So any last minute thoughts, closing thoughts, Dr. Saad and Jaydeep?
I'll jump in just because you got the different rotations and give you a little bit of what we're doing here now. So we started working with Pawan a couple of years ago, I think roughly 2 years ago. The students that have rotated here, Pawan does a great job preparing them. And we have right now roughly a little over 80% match rate first time for the students that have rotated here, which is great. And Jaydeep is one of our, awesome graduates.
Yep.
I remember, sorry, Dr. Saad, to cut you in between, but I remember all of us, all my colleagues who rotated with you, all of us got them matched. So thanks to you and the wonderful guidance.
I think we have 14. That was our first year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Because you're a second year resident. So it started in one clinic here in Dearborn, Michigan, in internal medicine. I have a passion for teaching, and it's expanded to where I've recruited and I've handpicked these other doctors in the different fields, a psychiatrist, a family doctor, and 2 OB doctors, OBGYNs, a pediatrician, and 2 general surgeons. And I recruited them in that we can offer all of the core rotations in a hospital academic setting. And the attendings have the similar personality as me. They want to teach. So we were able to recruit these doctors and help students who want to rotate with USMLE Start These Help. We're able to make it a smooth rotation, and they don't have, if they just follow the instructions, they will go through their rotation without much issue. And along with that, me and Pawan, we kept bouncing ideas how we can help the students and how we can make this a really successful rotation. Housing is a huge issue. So if you go to like Chicago or New York or a big city, you end up spending more just to get in the housing and the transportation, and trying to get to the hospital could take you over an hour in the mass transit. It's pretty crazy. We were able to team up with a local apartment complex. There's 14 apartments in this complex, and it's not even half a mile away from the clinics. And Amir is actually staying there right now. We get a discounted deal with a fully furnished apartment. So the student comes in here, they get a fully furnished apartment. It's in a safe area. So sometimes you hear horror stories of people going to do rotations and they stay in a not safe area. So I picked the apartment complex that I recommend. That way the student's getting a great deal, and it's a safe area that's fully furnished. So they just come here and they're able to really focus on the rotation. They don't have to worry about all that extra stuff. And in our clinic, we started 2 years ago, and now I have affiliation agreements with major universities. So University of Michigan, Western Michigan, Central Michigan, and Wayne State are all sending students to our clinics. So you can ask, and this happened over the last 16 months, you can ask any of our rotators, yeah, you might be a foreign medical graduate who's rotating here, but the person next to you is going to be from University of Michigan rotating here as well. So you really get the American medical rotation system in our clinics. So, any student who wants to match in the United States, I really recommend they do a rotation where you're going to be in almost like in a residency program before you go interview with a program director, so you can feel confident and you're going to be able to answer the questions that the program directors are going to be looking for. So it's been awesome working with you, Pawan, over the last couple of years, building this network of doctors around Detroit, Michigan.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. I appreciate your time. Jaideep, any closing thoughts on USCE in general? Anything that we missed?
I think that was a wonderful point that rotating in Dearborn would really, save on the expenses. And yeah, so whatever one decides. But for me personally, working with Dr. Saad was an amazing experience because not that he's a great doctor and a great mentor, but it was more of a family environment with great camaraderie, rotating with diverse medical students, as Dr. Saad said, from different backgrounds and different medical schools. So that also allowed me to, broaden my horizon and get acquainted to the American medical system. But with the new trends and now the step one scores being, pass and fail, we are going to lose all the objectivity which was there on the scores. So a person could be evaluated and see a 240 or 260 or whatever, XYZ, and say that this is higher than the other or filter people out based on the scores. Now that is going to be, scrapped off, it's going to be harder for a foreign medical graduate. I don't know whether it's going to be harder or easier, nothing is known, but based on speculations, a lot of other factors would be considered in for an application to be matched. And for that, an applicant would meticulously need to look for rotations and do as many clinical experiences in diverse outpatient and inpatient. And that would become really imperative and important.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaideep. Patrick, are you still on? Any closing thoughts from you?
Yes, so based on for the pass-fail system, still I'm doing my rotations, but so I cannot give you 100% clear picture. But I personally think that since the pass-fail system is coming into play, it's more about being wise about where you actually do the rotation rather than just doing it in 7 or 8 places, because especially for IMGs, it's a very expensive journey, and there's a lot of agencies out there who are charging like $3,000, $4,000 for one single rotation, and it's kind of hard for IMGs. But from my experience, I went to Dr. Saad's clinic first, and it was worth every penny that I paid, because you get the best experience that you can get. And I can say that because right now I'm doing my second rotation right now. And when I'm comparing my first with my second, I now understand how important or how good Dr. Saad's rotation was. You get the ultimate experience. You get hands-on experience individually with each patient, and I think that's very important. And Dr. Saad actually really cares about what you actually are doing, and that you should, really get a good residency spot. And he really cares about it, and he actually does everything for it. So yeah, I think it's more about, other than the points that Jaideep and Dr. Saad added, I think that's the only other point that I want to add about the pass-fail system.
Okay. All right. I think that was all that we had. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I see some chats going on. Yes, so you can go to our website, send us an email, and we can get you, working with Dr. Saad in these locations for different specialties, same specialty. It's all there. So all the best, everyone, and thank you very much, Dr. Saad, Jaideep, and Patrick. Appreciate your time to help out, future applicants.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Pawan. Thank you, Dr. Saad.
Thank you.
And good luck to all.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.